Good morning.
Dich Maitke.
It's wonderful to be here this morning with Jefferson Green. We are here for the Indigenous People Table Talk. As you all know, I am Mrs. Walker, the Director of Equity and Inclusion here at Worcester Academy. We originally had Jefferson, Mr. Green, slated to be with us during Native American History Month. But I actually think that in many ways, this is poetic justice, that we weren't able to come together and do this table talk until now, because really Indigenous people should be celebrated every month, every day, every minute of the year. And we should have these conversations throughout the year, not just during Native American History Month. And it's a pleasure to be here with you, Jefferson, to have this important conversation. So you provide workshops, stories, games, dances, songs, and arts to students young and inexperienced. So we're excited to hear more about that. I want to give everybody watching now a quick overview of where we're going to go with this conversation, and sort of what we're going to cover in some of the topics in question. Where do you center yourself as an Indigenous person? And I guess with this question, I'll be asking you to cover more about general, right? So your experience, but also the Indigenous experience. And I'm going to begin with a couple of reflection questions for you. So the first one that I want to ask you is, what do you think about Thanksgiving? I think probably everybody listening to this call right now, watching, knows what Thanksgiving is, knows that it is a dedicated national holiday in the United States. But as an Indigenous person, there are different things that come into play, and it means different things for different people. So how do you celebrate, if you celebrate, and recognize the holiday, if at all?
Thank you, Bonnie. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation. A little bit about Thanksgiving. When I was younger, we would do a Thanksgiving dinner on Thanksgiving, and it was never talking about the history of it. It was more of we're getting together to give thanks for each other, for our community, for life, for the abundance of all of our resources. And we have ceremonies that are giving thanks all year long. And so when the Roman calendar comes up and it says Thanksgiving, it's just another opportunity and excuse to have a good meal. And so as time went on, though, it began to come to the forefront. I'm looking back at all of the pictures of pilgrims and turkeys and how, and you see the leaves and the orange and all of that, like it's got a theme. And so it's interesting to look at that depiction of how we have to remind our Euro-American culture to have thanks almost. And when you're Indigenous and you've been here for thousands of years and hundreds of generations, you're always told and taught about the importance of survival, the importance of humility, the importance of recognizing that we are not in control of the earth, the weather, the seasons, that we live in harmony with those elements. And so after thousands of years, we've watched the animals, we've watched different elements of our environment to see how temperatures change and how we have to be prepared for these upcoming seasons and temperatures. And so we would always find ourselves in situations where we are thankful for those resources that we got in those moments and in those weeks or days. And then we could survive in shelters for weeks and months at a time because of our humility and connection to the earth. And so those ceremonies of thankfulness come out in our culture till this day, all year long. And it's, the coronavirus threw a big wrench in a lot of our cultures. And so this was like one of the first years that we didn't do these ceremonies every weekend, and then started our winter ceremonies in November and December, and because it's just unsafe right now. And so getting back to Thanksgiving, that now our family today, and even our ceremonies, we don't actually, for Thanksgiving in particular, we will usually wait until the weekend to do a Thanksgiving dinner, so to say, just because of what the Roman calendar has made it out to be. And that's just not how we have always looked at what is thankfulness. And so we do bust out a turkey and sorts, but it's not an indigenous food. We have a native word for turkey too. It's called Kwal Minuk. And it wasn't a traditional food though in our time. And so it's interesting, how things have evolved, right, in time. And so every time we have a ceremony, we have the organic foods that have been bestowed upon our people generation after generation. And it's very physically enduring to get some of those foods. And so, but it's really important for us to have those foods on the table. So it's not like we have, turkey and dressing and all of that. And maybe folks bring that, but we actually like to have all our huckleberries, our roots, and our meats and our fish and all of those on the table that you can't actually get, at the local grocery store. And that's because that's in our heritage to be thankful to those resources for our survival. And so that's a long answer to Thanksgiving, and that's where we're at. And so our family, ever since our grandparents have passed, the younger generation, we don't have it on Thursday. We have our meals on other days.
What did your education as a child tell you about Native Americans and Indigenous people? So was it in contrast to what you actually learned amongst your people or within your family when you went into the educational system, and sort of how did you balance that or reconcile if there were differences?
Yeah, so when we were going to school, there's an elementary school on the Warm Springs Indian Reservation where I grew up, and every year we would just put up all of these pictures that depicted Thanksgiving and what that was. And that's, we had learned that the Pilgrims and the Native Americans had came together and had this great meal together, and it was a symbol of two nations coming together to have a meal. And that was that, and it wasn't until maybe high school, but for sure college is like when you really started to get deeper into a lot of those histories. And that surprised me too, that even on the Indian reservation, we don't learn those things. And then because it's attached to the school district, which is predominantly non-Native. And so they have their curriculum that they approve of, right? And so even when you get into middle school and high school, you still were taught that Thanksgiving is two nations coming together for a meal and sorts. And so I was so appalled actually when I had finally gotten to college and had read a book. I believe it's by D. Brown, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And it is full of journals and depictions of a period way back when, journals from soldiers and pioneers and sorts of what they had seen, what they had experienced in that time, and the genocide that was happening, every day of that era.
For populations that experience extreme oppression, there is this dichotomy between moving forward, right? Persevering and resilience, coupled with pride, right? Pride in who we are and that being enough to stand on. Again, coupled with the idea that we have to educate the people coming behind us, our kids coming behind us. And sometimes it is very complicated and it's hard to do both. How do we talk about the oppression, the racism, the genocide, all of the things that are hardships and challenges, and that are not necessarily positive, right? How do we do that? Because there is some responsibility to that, but how do we also keep moving forward and instill confidence in the children, and the people coming behind us? I think there is great challenge there, and I don't think that you kind of went off on a tangent at all. I think you spoke to a lot of different complicated things, so I appreciate that a lot. I think,
yeah, and if I can add,
yeah,
also in our upbringing, even though there was racism in and around, our area, even racism within my community, one tribe to another tribe, people to a people, right? And there's deep history in even that. But going back to my grandparents, they never taught hate. And even till this day, like I may have differences of opinions and experiences with other communities and cultures, but that's no reason to hate. And so even with our children, like we may point out a difference, but we always say like our cultures are to be respected because of their differences. And that's what we need to instill in our generation, these little children, um, and even our choice of words, those very harsh F words or SH words or whatever they may be, like you can program yourself to change that vocabulary as well, and find other ways to express yourself in not such heightened, very sharp words and striking out to anybody, right? And so I do acknowledge that even my people could be ignorant to different issues, and it seems as though our culture has individuals that are coming out to be that way, but I think it could be that enlightenment could still be found in each and every one of us. Like when we have that ability to know that we can grow every day, we can change every day to become better. We're not lost causes, right? And so any of that hate that some of us are taught as children, we can reprogram that, because when that anger gets out and it's around you, it's on you. It's an energy and it stays on you. That anger, that hate, that judgment, right? And we've got to shake it off, right? You've got to really start meditating on what is goodness, what energy could you put on you that just is good, because nobody needs stress on any side. It's just how can we breathe better, how can we connect better and contribute to a future that we can be proud of, right? And there's just a lot of noise at times, right? And so going back to our family and how we've always made it is that had a lot of things that have happened to our people, but don't hate the situation, don't hate the people. How do you find enlightenment on this path? Because we're still here. So
yeah, I love it, and it speaks through you, that resilience. I think to that point, I would love to hear more about your work at Columbia River Institute, for Indigenous development, and the short acronym for this is CREED. Could you tell us more about your work here and how you got involved?
Yes, thank you. So the CREED Foundation is a short name for the Columbia River Institute for Indigenous Development Foundation. And I've always been drawn to what is our beliefs, and my grandmother and her sisters and her brothers and all of them that was of that generation, and me observing that. What they did was what they believed in, and they believed in each other, and they believed in the words of their grandmothers and their grandfathers, and they followed in that belief. And we continue to do our ceremonies because we believe that's what's kept us here, is that understanding that we are the children. We are not the parents of the earth. We are supposed to be the children, and we learn and we grow and we connect. And so when creed, when, in English, it is a set of beliefs, right? And in language revitalization and working in and around our people, we still practice our beliefs in our ceremonies. And so I wanted to have creed in the word, in the foundation, but just not spelled the way it was. And so anyhow, so years ago, long story short, we started a youth program, and I was teaching songs and dances that I had learned from when I was a little guy, from my grandma and her sisters and brothers. And we would travel around and we would do these dances. And, doing things, repetitively, it's ingrained into your heart and into your mind and your body and your spirit, your aura. And so as I became an adult, about 10 years ago, I began to teach these songs and dances to help youth find themselves and their path and have a sense of identity and connection to their home. And I was praised for the efforts and for the classes, and it really took off and created a great spark in the community and in these youth. And I appreciate, though, that there was also some side conversation about how I do what I do and why I do it, right? And some of it was positive and some of it was negative. But all in all, what came out was that I can teach all these songs and dances and stories, but not having a full grasp and understanding of the language, which is the roots of our culture and the roots of our identity, that I'm just a teacher trying to teach, and that's how it will always be. And so I could never really know or understand if I don't know the language. And so after about 4 years of that program and teaching songs and dances, I decided to put both feet into language and work with our elders who were saying you should learn language. And so I would do home visits, I would do office visits. I got a part-time job with the language department to just crunch numbers, do paperwork, whatever I can to be around elders that were being paid to teach the language. And there were elders on both sides of that conversation too. You have elders that say, well, we shouldn't be paid to teach our language. And then you had other elders that was like, well, our people have to learn it, and our tribe is providing employment for us to do this for our people. And so you had two different conversations. And here I was trying to navigate in that conversation and network with all of those elders. And so I got a part-time job, and that a year later became a full-time job. And I just began to try to find out what is the quickest path to fluency. And when you get an education and you look at systems and you look at end products or end curriculums or end students, right? Whatever we're ingraining into our youth and our students, it's got to be scaffolded. There's got to be an end result, right? Otherwise, we're just teaching addition and have at it, and there's nothing after. Or you're teaching a story about Ohio, and then you go, like this. It's constantly supposed to help us grow. And lovingly, I wasn't really seeing that the curriculum could really escalate my language acquisition to where I needed to be. And so I started really analyzing that system. And that's what leading me to really getting into linguistics, and I ended up back in college just for linguistic classes.
And as you talk about language and the importance of learning the language, right? Not just teaching the lesson, but understanding the language, this deeper level element of it. It reminds me of the work that we are very focused on now in this community on culturally responsive education and teaching and community. So
Mhm.
it's one thing to say teach math or, teach history or English, whatever it is. You can actually teach the skills of the subject, but unless you get to understanding the language of the learner before you, speaking
Mhm.
their language, connecting with them, which is
Mhm.
culturally responsive, culturally responsible, you're not going to actually do more than teach that lesson, right? You're not really teaching them sort of the critical and the social emotional skills, and what it means to be that being in that space, taking on the development and learning, right? It
Mhm.
just becomes an exercise. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think that we're speaking the same language. We're sort of calling it different things, but that's what
Mhm.
we're getting at.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
really appreciate the way that you've articulated that for us, and very much so the work that you're doing in the foundation, in the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Thank
been
you.
very inspiring. Yeah, and working with these folks that really want our children to be able to have a connection to their language and to their ancestry. And some of our elders have devoted, 40 to 50 years of their life to helping develop materials and children's books. And and I just like to honor their legacy in that by continuing to do the work. I also want to be forthright too. Remember earlier I had said that there's racism even in our community, and that history that was between one tribe that was at war with the United States continued to be at war after some tribes signed treaties with the United States. They continued to be so, and some of those tribes had raided some of the villages just to continue their fight against the United States and their military and trying to just keep their homelands. And so even outside of that, though, even deeper, some of those tribes didn't like each other even before contact. And there's some of that history documented here and there. So going into it, I think that even in our community that we have also, I've seen my uncles try to embed racism even to us as children, right? Whether they're comments they make about other races, period. Because on the Indian reservation, it's 99% Native American. And especially on our reservation, being as rural as we are, it's all brown people. And it's rare to see a white person, or a Shiapo is what we call. Um, and so getting into where we're at today is I didn't we didn't even see much of other races at all until we got off of the reservation, and it was just a madhouse, right, where anybody who was non-native was like an enemy to us, because of the movies that we were watching, cowboys and Indians, and the Indians always lose. And so when we came off the reservation as a group of kids to go to middle school off the reservation, it was just a madhouse, and that takes like 3 to 4 years for some kids to really transition better, through sports and through school activities and everything. Um, and I feel like some schools didn't really care to integrate that racism or try to neutralize it. They just let us be. And that's why it takes so long for it to transition into a more peaceful high school experience. But the middle school part was just crazy. And so here I see that there's a lot going on even right now, right, in our country. And when I had gone off the reservation and saw even more, backgrounds and people and of different experiences, and then going to college and then being the only brown person in my class too, was very interesting at a community level in the city. Um, and it intimidated me, right? And I still wanted to sit in those classes. I don't know why I had this ambition to go to college, but yeah, I'm getting to the point where, being the only brown person there, and trying to get more and more into the urban city. So let's go back to the original question. Yeah, about um, where we help and support other communities in their fight, because that racism has continued to hinder our ability to even connect across city boundaries and state boundaries. And it was at the college level that they had taught that alliance was so important. And so we had connected with the NCAACP, we connected with the Latino groups and then Native groups, and with other groups in and around for social causes, and that was what made our group stronger, and how we began to, when we graduated school, we began to put that into our communities. And I think there's just not enough of that alliance and connection to other communities that is happening to make us even stronger. So
Absolutely. I think that united front is important, and learning, right, where does racism live in us as individuals? And then how does that come out in the communities that we navigate? And I think it's also a real problem is when we don't recognize it, right? I think the first step is coming out of denial or recognition that this lives in us and it lives in our communities. There's inter-racism within our communities. There's colorism within our communities. There is the things that we impose on others. But how do we then reflect on all of that and come together to do something different going forward?
it's almost like in the culture of this country to shame someone because of what they're perceived to look like. And it's just very interesting times. And so, but now in this day, like where I've been and where I'm at in my community, a lot of folks, it's almost like, I'm not sure, I never hear them shame me for not having the long hair, shame me for not being dark. Um, and I've just tried to serve our people, right? But yet, those that don't serve our people, they're not treated like the other darker, So it does exist all over the place, and we're fighting that even in our own community.
I think it's really important that we take the time to check our implicit biases, the biases that are just sort of built into us based on the family we came into and the messages that were taught to us as very young children. The messages that we get from media, from society, from the things that are in schools and textbooks that are antiquated or misleading or, dare I say, historically incorrect or historical lies, really. So there are a lot of layers to this and to the challenges.